Hi, Michael and Middleton here, continuing on with the reading of my allegorical fiction novel, The Great Deep. I will give you a moment here, as always, to pause on the back and read the general description if this is the first video you're running across in this series. Links will be in the description. Chapter 14. William hardly noticed it when two of the gray creatures climbed onto his back to remove the tiny arrows from his shoulder. The sudden jolt of pain from the arrows' barbed tips being torn from his flesh caught his attention, however. "Ow! Hey!" He reflexively sat up, swatting at the pain. The gray creatures deftly leapt from his back and fled across the floor of the cave. "You are lucky to be alive, young lord," Sador addressed him warmly. The tone of his voice grew more somber as he continued. The Dark Ones frequently laced their weapons with the fast-acting poison. The word poison made William's heart skip a beat. "But you have drunk deeply of the healing waters. You shall not perish." As William silently rose to his feet, he particularly noted that the pain in his right arm had vanished. He held his arm up to examine it. It appeared to be completely healed. His eyes grew wide and his mouth dropped open slightly as he repeatedly squeezed his hand into a fist, testing the arm's strength. "But how?" he stammered. Sador replied, "That is but one of 1,000 questions, I presume." He bowed his head for a moment as he continued. "Perhaps it is best if we start at the beginning." His head still bowed, Sador raised only his eyes to meet William's gaze. "You are about to know," he paused, "something that no one of your kind has known for more than 1,000 years. Now, I'll pause just briefly here and let you know there's footnotes, scripture references and footnotes included in the text that I won't be reading for this reading, but you can find them in the printed version, of course. William was close to rupturing with anticipation as Sador continued. "Are you sure that you desire the responsibility of this knowledge?" The words leapt uncontrollably from William's lips. "Heck yeah!" He then felt suddenly embarrassed at having blurted out in such manner. He quickly grasped for the noble, wisdom-seeking tone of voice that was used on all of those kung fu movies they watched on Saturday mornings. "I mean, yes, great teacher, I would like to understand." That still didn't feel quite right, but William figured that he would let it go rather than risking embarrassing himself further. Sador now simply stared at him with a confused look on his face. It seemed as though anything outside of a simple, direct sincerity perplexed him. Please," William said meekly. "In the beginning," Sador began. "Yes, let us begin in the beginning." He then drew in a slow, deep breath, like someone about to begin telling a very long story. As he began to speak, Sador's eyes gazed right through William, focusing on the memories of eons past. Scores of tiny villagers filtered out of their homes and away from their other occupations, slowly gathering around in silent homage to the recounting of this tale. "In the beginning, the Great One created all things." He spoke quite slowly. "He first created the spirit realm, a place of glory and majesty, and inapproachable light. He then fashioned the material world as its reflection. Remember this, young lord," he addressed William directly. "That which eyes of flesh may perceive is but a reflection, an echo, no more than a foretaste of that which is truly real." Sador paused and then continued. "The Great One has purposed from the beginning that these two realms would one day wed and become one, together to become a more glorious creation than either could be on its own." William listened intently, trying to understand the meaning of this imagery. Pardon me, I'm helping a little jumping spider not get squished. Move along. You see, William, Sador called him by name now, the ultimate purpose of the Great One, the Lord of Lords, has always been to attain a counterpart, a reflection of himself, a bride. You, young Lord, are a tiny portion of that bride. This was beginning to sound strangely familiar to William. It is for this purpose, and this purpose alone, Sador continued, that untold billions of stars now burn in the deep heavens. William slowly nodded, indicating that he understood, at least in a limited way. When this world was framed, Sador's eyes grew wide with memories of wonder. Such glory as you have never imagined filled the air, the land, the sea. The very atmosphere was saturated with the music of the stars. Aware that his thoughts and words were beginning to drift, Sador refocused himself. All of these wonders were fashioned for the benefit of the creation that would grow into his bride. You, William, as I've already stated, are a tiny portion of that bride. We, the Ankara, were created along with man to serve as a dim reflection of your race. We were created for the purpose of helping you to understand yourselves and to help you understand the Great One's care for you through the experience of caring for us. Mankind was given full dominion over the earth and all of its creatures, including the Ankara. We therefore refer to your race as the Lords of the Earth, as this is an accurate representation of the Great One's mandate. And, he smiled at William, this is why we have referred to you as a young lord. Sador paused to allow all of this to sink in before continuing. All was beauty and joy in the beginning. The Lord of Lords fashioned 7 great fountains that rose from the depths, forming streams of living water, which ran throughout the earth. Instantaneous healing of any infirmity was readily available to all. But after darkness entered the human race with Adam's fall, each generation became more deeply stained with sin. As you have seen for yourself, there is a price attached to the healing which the water brings, the acknowledgement of one's need. It was the Great One's desire that the water of life should provide healing for both body and spirit. In order for this healing to occur, one must be willing to see and acknowledge their need. As each generation of mankind grew darker and more depraved, they became unwilling to admit this need and thus unable to be healed. As mankind's self-loathing sickness spread, your kind persecuted the Ankara mercilessly. Sador's words, though passionate, directed no malice at William. You see, he began again, sin produced self-hatred. Being your reflection, it was inevitable that this hatred would overflow onto us, a most convenient target. Untold millions of our kind were held captive and slowly tormented to death for the amusement of those infected by the insanity that darkness breeds. William now felt a deep sense of regret and shame. Can these things really be true? As a child of Adam, could such a vile potential reside within him? Sador's voice rose slightly as his tale reached its final climax. When this cancer of hatred had spread throughout the human race, the Great One declared an end. Driven half mad with grief, he decided to purge creation of this infection. Sador motioned to an attendant who held several scrolls. The attendant paced over to Sador, who selected one of them and unrolled it. Holding the scroll in front of them, he began, as the great book declares, Then the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And the Lord was sorry that he had made man on the earth, and he was grieved in his heart. So the Lord said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, creeping thing and birds of the air, for I am sorry that I have made them. As Sador paused, a swarm of revelation overtook William. You're talking about the flood, aren't you? You know, Noah, big boat, lots of animals? Sador nodded in agreement. Yes, young lord. I see that you are somewhat familiar with the great book. The Lord of Lords did manage to find one among your race that had not been fully consumed by the darkness. You have named him. Through this one man and his family, he would preserve a remnant of his creation. Sador unrolled a scroll a bit more and continued. Noah was 600 years old when the flood of waters was on the earth. So Noah, his wife, and his sons' wives went into the ark because of the waters of the flood. Of clean beasts, of beasts that are unclean, of birds, and of everything that creeps on the earth, 2 by 2 they went into the ark to Noah, male and female, as God had commanded Noah. And it came to pass after 7 days that the waters of the flood were on the earth. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, the 17th day of the month, on that day, all the fountains of the great deep were broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened, and the rain was on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. Sador rolled the scroll back up and handed it to the attendant. He then turned to William once again. And so the earth was purged from the wickedness of man, for a time, he said. Along with the torrential rain, the Great One broke up the fountains of the great deep, flooding the earth. The pool that you stand before is a remnant of one of those fountains. You mean... Wow, William said. Is that how all those guys in the Bible used to live so long? I always thought that those numbers were like typos or something. I wondered if Noah was really 600 years old when the flood came. Yes, William, this water has the capacity to vastly extend one's life, Sador replied. But even it, glorious as it is but a reflection. The true water of life is a seed which is planted in one's spirit when they confess their need and are restored to fellowship with the Great One, the Lord of Lords. I think I understand, William said. Sador continued, This seed lies buried deeply within each who has become a recipient of grace. It will remain hidden there, slowly transforming the mind and spirit until the great day. The great day? Asked William. When the Lord of Lords returns to establish the eternal kingdom, Sador explained. On that day, that truly glorious day, he continued, heaven and earth shall wed and become one. God's very presence will saturate everything, and darkness will be put away forever. The creation of God will be eternally restored to that which it was always intended to be. There was a long silence as the magnificence of this statement reverberated through every heart and mind. Then Sador continued, After the great flood, mankind once again multiplied and spread across the face of the earth. Soon, darkness had once again enticed your race, and we once again found ourselves the targets of hideous persecution. As hatred and violence grew once more, the Lord of Lords divided the earth into 7 great land masses in order to slow its progress, each continent sheltering the remnant of one of the fountains of the great deep. We, the Ankara, took refuge from man's persecution in the deep places of the earth, and the Great One gave us the task of protecting and caring for what remains of the fountains of living water. When the great day arrives, they shall be restored to their former glory and purpose. From memory, Sador once again quoted from the great book. For the Lamb who is in the midst of the throne will shepherd them and lead them to living fountains of waters, and God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. Sensing that he had finished speaking, William asked, Sador, may I ask a few questions? Certainly, young lord, he warmly replied. Those glowing rocks, what do you call them? William inquired. I've never seen anything like them before. They are the Shekinah stones, Sador replied. The light which they emit is but a dim reflection of the Shekinah of God, the all-consuming glory which emanates from his very presence. A dim reflection, William quipped. You've got to be kidding. No flesh could survive the absolute purity of the true Shekinah, Sador replied. Even the great prophet Moses, for his own safety, was only allowed to see a glimpse of the Great One's back as he passed by on that mountain. And the Apostle Paul was struck blind and nearly incinerated by the briefest glimpse of the risen Lord's glory. Not until the great day, when darkness has been fully purged, will any survive such an encounter. William could form no concept of such a thing, but simply accepted it for the time being. Well, those necklaces, he began. As you have probably already guessed, Sador interrupted, the sound stones they contain greatly amplify sound. They enable us to communicate over much greater distances than we otherwise could. Cool, William replied. Sador spoke again. The Great One has also provided us with many other special gifts, such as fire stones. He withdrew 2 small stones from the pouch that hung from his side and held them up for William to see. When these 2 are struck together, the surfaces which make contact generates a tremendous amount of heat for a moment or two. So, that must be what happened to those mouse traps, William concluded. I thought that spring looked like it had been melted. He paused, then shyly said, sorry about that, by the way. I'll never set another mouse trap again, I promise. Yes, we do not spend all of our time underground, another of the Ankara interjected. We do venture out at night to forage for food and building materials and such useful discarded items as we may find. William stared at the stranger, thinking that he somehow looked familiar. I am Enid, he said. I am grateful that you have fully recovered from your injuries. He then bowed his head slightly and sheepishly concluded, I did not mean to cause you harm. No problem, William replied. It was really kind of my fault. A new thought entered William's mind, and his voice now took on a darker tone. But who is that shot me with the arrows? He asked pointedly. Who is Marshak? Marshak, Enid's voice quivered with a peculiar mixture of both anger and grief, was once my brother. Was your brother? William asked. What do you mean, was? He has become one of the Dark Ones, Enid replied coldly. Sador noted the question in William's eyes as Enid paced sadly away. You see, young lord, he began, as the end of darkness approaches, the sickness of sin has begun to infect even a few among the Ankara. Marshak has become one of the Dark Ones. Consumed by hatred, anger, and resentment, they refuse to embrace the healing that comes from the pool of truth. Instead, they embrace the darkness and seek to spread pain and destruction wherever they can. They bear a particularly strong resentment towards your race, young lord, and constantly plot new ways of doing harm to mankind. Whoa, you mean like gremlins? William inquired. Again, this reference meant nothing to Sador. We know that they have been responsible for certain outbreaks of disease, he began, and they occasionally cause destructive fires and the like. In recent days, Marshak and those he leads have been staging a series of raids on this village, stealing a great number of sound stones and fire stones. They have been very methodical, and we're convinced that they're planning something diabolical. We do not yet know what this is, however. What's he so angry about? William asked. Everyone here seems so nice. When Marshak was young, he made a habit of holding on to small hurts, Sador replied. Over time, his heart grew heavy and dark with this burden. He sighed deeply and then continued. When the time came for him to wed, he asked Lucinda to join with him, but she loved Marshak's brother, Enid, and chose him instead. Marshak gave in to the anguish and rage that he had fostered within himself over the years and became fully consumed by the darkness. The night before Enid and Lucinda were to be wed, he set fire to Lucinda's dwelling and stole away to join a band of the Dark Ones. Since that night, the darkness within him has grown to such a point that he has now become their leader. William did not know what to say in response to such a sad tale. He just stood there, silently. Suddenly a tiny trumpet rang out across the great cavern. It is near sunset, Sador announced. You should be getting home now. Oh, right, William said, suddenly realizing that he hadn't had any idea what time of day it was. As William bent down to tie his bootlaces, Sador calmly said, You are welcome to visit this place again if you would like. However, I must insist that you do not share with anyone the fact of our existence. Yeah, I understand, William replied. Besides, if I said anything, they'd probably just lock me away. He finished tying his boot and returned hurriedly through the long passageway to where his rope dangled from the room above, Enid lighting his way with a Shekinah stone. Retrieving his gear, he ascended the rope to the fort. He then quickly untied the rope from the leg of the couch and tossed it aside. Finally, he dragged the couch back across the floor so that its proximity to the opening would not betray its existence to Sharon or anyone else who might stumble upon the cave. I'll find some kind of way to hide this hole, he assured Enid, so that no one else discovers it. Exiting the cave just after sunset, William quickly made his way over to where Chester was still tied. Sorry I was gone so long, he said. I'll bet you're thirsty. William removed the lid from his canteen and held it up to the horse's mouth. Dusty nostrils flared wide as the horse caught the scent of cool water. William coaxed the horse's chin high into the air so that its head tilted back slightly and then slowly emptied the canteen. Chester did his best to lap up what he could of it. When the canteen was empty, William untied Chester from the great oak tree and swung up into the saddle. Home, boy, he said, prodding the horse into a pace just slightly faster than he was comfortable with. Together they crested the dusty knoll and raced the darkness home.